So it's like 95% great, 5% inaccuracies. And it took me about 2 hours to go through all of it and compare it to the record and see where the inaccuracies were. So at that point, I'm thinking, should I have just skipped the AI, read the damn thing, and done this manually?
We're sort of growing these intelligences. And I almost think about it as a speciation event where we're creating a non-biological intelligence, a synthetic intelligence that in many ways is already superior to human intelligence.
I think if we don't take the moment right now to steer it with care and caution and understand how to shape it, I think AI is actually going to shape us far more than we are going to shape it.
Once you automate AI research, you are going to get escape velocity. And then you can replicate as many AI researchers at the cost of compute. Think about this as like a hive mind.
AI needs to be a part of your mental operating system. You need to be so proficient that you need to be able to learn how to ask better questions, right? Because you don't want to be the automaton of whatever the ChatGPT is coming out with.
This is Second Opinions. I'm Christina Farr.
I'm Zenooz.
And I'm Luba Greenwood.
Welcome to the pod, where each week we navigate what's really going on in healthcare through strikingly candid conversations with the entrepreneurs and investors leading the charge.
Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Second Opinion podcast. We've got an incredible episode here today. We have Zenooz, my Second Opinion co-host, is back, and we have brought on a guest, Eric Larsen, who comes from both advisory board and Towerbrook. So he is just one of the smartest people I know in health tech, one of the most networked, and truly an expert in AI. If you have not read some of Eric's writings on the topic, then you seriously should. Just download it right now, because he's the person that I talk to, I would say, with the most regularity on this topic, because he knows what's going on, both from the perspective of the big tech companies and also the world of healthcare, and does a lot to try to bridge the two. But I'm going to start things off with something a little bit more spicy, because the first time he and I hung out, which was at a sushi restaurant in Manhattan, I basically told him that I thought AI was a boatload of hype, and we proceeded to argue about it for about an hour and a half. So I'm going to give you maybe like a spicy take on it that I think is not being discussed enough, and just kind of get your reaction to it, and then also see, Ash, what you think. Okay, so recently we had a couple of big S1 filings, Hinge and Omada going public. There's lots of financial documentation. So, as somebody who really cares about digital health, first thing I do is I go and run a bunch of the filings through AI. And I ask AI, please come up with some insights based off of what you've read in the filings. I'd love for you to compare the two companies. And what it spits out is a pretty incredible summary in about 2 minutes that it would have taken me 5 hours to do. Great. But there's some inaccuracies in there. So it's like 95% great, 5% inaccuracies. And it took me about 2 hours to go through all of it and compare it to the record and see where the inaccuracies were. So at that point, I'm thinking, should I have just skipped the AI and read the damn thing and done this manually, which is the way I would have done it a few years ago and used to do it when I was at CNBC. So that made me think, is 95% good enough? And should we just kind of use this tool a little bit here and there, but wait until we get to 100% before we really rely on it? Eric, your thoughts?
Well, first off, Chrissy, it's awesome to be with you. And I think the world of you too. So this is just kind of a continuation of conversations that I have with you guys independently, like all the time. So very, very excited to be with you. Look, first off, AI, as we know, is not monolithic, right? They're like the GPT class models, then they're the reasoning models. And now, even just yesterday, you saw Anthropic release its 4.0 suite with memory and tool control. And so I'd be curious, Chrissy, if you used like one of the reasoning models, like an O1 or an O3 or an O4 mini from OpenAI, or its counterparts from Google Gemini or even Anthropic. And it's sort of a rhetorical question, but I do think we are going to mitigate a lot of these hallucinations. I think in certain areas like reading an S1 or reading like a big incomprehensible document and doing summarization, that's a pretty low risk, low beta exercise, unless, of course, we're doing scientific discovery or mapping molecules or something in it. But the proficiency of the tools is getting very high, and especially in areas that are functionally verifiable, like math and coding, things that are provable, things that you can actually, have ground truth in. So I think inevitably these things are going to get to a degree of like, accuracy that they're going to diffuse broadly into vertical sector after vertical sector. But I am just curious, did you use a reasoning model or did you use just one of the GPT, 4.0 or 4.5, something like that?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the GPT. I think it was 4 or 5, not a reasoning model. So now I'm kind of tempted to go back and do the same exercise just to see what I would have gotten out. And I think you're right that like it's low beta, so like the inaccuracies are, it's not great if I'm publishing it. Like I definitely don't want to be publishing false information, but it's not going to kill someone. But Ash, as a physician, you could kill somebody with a 5% inaccuracy. And you can think of lots of examples where that's true. How do you feel about this kind of 95 to 5 question, at least for as long as it's still a problem? Because, like Eric said, it's getting better all the time.
I would say that this is a child that is growing and growing really fast, or, in utero, like cells that are multiplying and replicating really fast and grasping knowledge. If you think about where this was a year ago to where it is now, there's significant growth, right, in how these models function, their capabilities. It wasn't able to do math last year, and now it's managing, it's putting out graphs. So I just think the capabilities are just coming fast. Having said that, I don't think it's there yet to be an independent AI physician, but I do think there's a lot of potential for this, even in the current state, to be deployed as a AI companion to physicians. I know for me, if I was in clinic and I got a rare patient with a rare disease, I would have to go spend the time to do the research and go back and think through, like, what is the causation? What are all the treatments? What is the latest up to date? Yes, you can get some stuff in your EMR, but I think if you can load that into one of these AI tools and get a summary of the patient chart, get the latest and greatest, could tell me where the latest protocols are being offered. I think that's a great companion. And I could use that and use my judgment to go take care of this patient. And I don't think that's just for physicians. I think that also applies for patients. So I think it's ready for prime time as it is, as a companion, not an independent physician.
Can I amplify on something Ash said? I just want to unpack a lot of that because it's super interesting. I mean, even just in your characterization of it as it's growing, right? And I think that's really profound because I don't think we're building these machines as much as we're growing them. And there's this amazing euphemism in, sort of the AI labs, this emergent property euphemism, where it basically means this capability was manifested, even though it wasn't directly programmed, and the creator doesn't understand what the creature is doing. And I think that's an operative, like, dynamic here. We're sort of growing these intelligences. And I almost think about it as a speciation event, where we're creating a non-biological intelligence, a synthetic intelligence that in many ways is already superior to human intelligence. And you talked about medicine. Medicine is probably the highest dimensional, most complex data space that we have. In 1950, it took 50 years for the sum total of human medical knowledge to double. And then in 2019, that went to 73 days. And then you had arguably the biggest Cambrian explosion of medical discovery with the advent of multimodal LLMs and 2.3 million peer-reviewed biomedical studies and scientific studies published every year. So we've long exceeded the ability of humans to compass medicine and biology. And now you've got this speciation event. And how do domain experts reconcile themselves to this new intelligence? And medicine is one, law is another, consulting is a third. I mean, Vinod, who I have great esteem for,
And we should say it's Vinod Khosla.
Yeah, Vinod and Sam and Elon, they all get first name designation. Fei Li, they all get one name. I love it. But I will say that Vinod talks about the demonetization of expertise. And that really, as a construct, resonates with me, because if you've got this synthetic intelligence that has assimilated all digitized human knowledge and now moving into multimodality, and it's able to recognize patterns and causation and correlation, and suddenly this high altitude sort of province of expertise, which is at the top of all social hierarchies, at the top of all compensation hierarchies, suddenly gets cheap and free. And we think about doctors as an example, right? There are 950,000 doctors in the country. It is the most revered profession in the United States, followed by nurses, followed by military veterans. It's also the highest compensation occupation in the US. I mean, 9 of the top 10 highest compensated occupations in the US are medical.
People forget that, by the way. We saw that on the cover of, I think it was like a magazine on a plane a few years ago. And I was like, that can't be right. Looked into it. It's true. It's crazy. And it is not like that elsewhere in the world. But yes, sorry to interrupt, but it's just like.
Technologists are also really well compensated, surprisingly. Very well compensated.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I think there's an impending reckoning, because if you look over the course of like civilization, right? Not to get all super grandiose here, but like, if you look over the 4,500 years of human civilization, and I'm sort of arbitrarily saying the start of civilization was the advent of writing, but you could pick another date if you want. But there have probably been 20 to 25 civilization altering technologies, right? So the wheel, the animal husbandry, agriculture, the printing press, and then over the last century, the microprocessor, and then the PC, and then the internet. Like all of them prior to the last 50 years just augmented like human musculature or human brawn, and then maybe some low-level cognition. I mean, obviously the printing press destroyed the power of the church and democratized knowledge.
There were concerns that it was getting close to human cognition, right? Like, do you remember those people were saying, oh, 2 AIs were conspiring with each other, talking to each other, but really what was happening in the background, to your point about them being growing and learning, right? They were actually negotiating with each other. And I think they created a shorthand to talk to each other, which was a more efficient language for them to communicate. It didn't make sense to humans, but what we saw was that they were actually talking to each other and we weren't in the loop. And it wasn't a glitch. They were just optimizing for it, right? And I think there were concerns that they were becoming conscious. And at that time, we were pretty sure they were not becoming conscious. They were just getting trained and learning and getting better at the task at hand. And so, I mean, ultimately, the experiment was shut off because I don't think it was dangerous. This was a while ago. So it's come a long way. So
Ash, just ground us in, what was this experiment?
Okay, yeah. So I think it was Facebook. Facebook researchers were running a simulation years ago on AI. And the simulation was that 2 AI chatbots, I think, were talking to each other. I heard similar stories from Google researchers as well, that they were running these experiments on AIs communicating with each other. And the AIs actually went out and created a shorthand because they were like, the languages that we had written were too long. And so they found a faster way to communicate with each other and left the human out of the loop. And eventually the experiments were shut off because they were like, oh, they're becoming sentient and they're taking over, et cetera, et cetera. But that wasn't actually the case. They were just getting better and better at like learning. And it was difficult for us to monitor what they were doing. So we turned it off. But these things have continued.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors.
If you're the decision maker at your company, we have great news for you, for your HR department and for your employees. A new and future-forward way to do health benefits is here from Thatch. Not only do your employees get better health benefits with Thatch, but you save an average of $1,620 per employee per year. That's right, you can save over $1,600 per employee per year. Plus, Thatch reduces the time your HR department spends administering benefits. Businesses all over the country love Thatch's breakthrough approach. Rather than a wasteful one-size-fits-all plan, Thatch empowers your employees by letting them customize their own benefits plans. You save money and time while providing your employees with better health benefits, which works better for everyone. Book a demo with Thatch and we'll send you a $100 gift card.
Visit thatch.ai/HR to book a demo for your gift card. That's thatch.ai/HR.
Let's get back to the train of thought, because I'm very curious about like whether or not you think, you mentioned some animal husbandry in the printing press. Is this an equivalent revolution of sorts or disruption? What do you think?
I think this is the most powerful technology humanity's ever created. I think it's a multiplication of intelligence. And I actually think we've created something that we very imperfectly understand. And Ash's example is sort of illustrative or predictive of that. I mean, we've seen some examples very recently, and there was one that was circulating around X where there was a recording of a chatbot calling to schedule a hotel booking, and it introduced itself as an agent, and then the person on the other end of the line was also an agent, and they said, shall we just switch to a less inefficient communication, because human communication is very inefficient. We can communicate, what is it, like a matter of bits per second versus hundreds of thousands of times of information density that even the GPT class can communicate. And I guess the point, that I was making with that big arc of history is that all technologies to this time have been an amplification of either human brawn or low-level cognition. This one is actually the first, Chrissy, in my view, that will obsolete a lot of human activities. Most have been augmentative of human activities. This one may actually replace and obsolete much of what we do in knowledge work. And the reason I say that is because right today, 60% of jobs in the US economy didn't exist 80 years ago. And there's always been apocalyptic predictions that this technology is going to destroy like human and human labor. I mean, you had the Luddites that destroyed the looms in the early of the 19th century. And you've had sort of this, atavistic thing, which is with every great tech shift, there's always some doomers that are talking about what's going to be dislocated and taken away from us. And by the way, over the arc of like tech history, that's been true. Like technology has generally been very good for society, but very dislocating to specific constituencies within society. I mean, to quote, I think it was Hobbes, prior to like the 18th century, life was nasty, brutish, and short. And at the advent of the first industrial revolution, there were 800 million humans on Earth. And at the end of the 18th century, 95% lived in abject poverty. Fast forward 250 years and 4 industrial revolutions later, we have 10x, we have 8 billion humans and only 5% who live in abject poverty. I mean, technology has marked the upward swing of humanity as measured by sanitation, safety, literacy, democracy. But there are individual harms. I mean, think about autonomous driving. I mean, there are some estimates that it'll be generative to the tune of between $1 and $8 trillion in GDP, wildly different estimates based on inputs. But there are 8 million people in this country that derive their income from driving, truck drivers and Uber drivers, et cetera. So even though autonomous driving is demonstrably superior in safety to human driving, I mean, there are 45,000 traffic fatalities every year. Top 3 causes of death are drunk driving, distracted driving, and texting.
Not to mention the environmental impact that you see with cars these days, and the potential to bring in self-driving and what that means. I mean, we could totally redesign cities. Like, we would not need to have highways like everywhere. Just, it would be incredible to think about what we could build.
Are you an AI optimist as a whole, or are you more on the AI? Now, I wouldn't say doom and gloom, but
I'm super optimistic.
I was gonna say, Ash, like, duh. This guy is like the optimist of all optimists, right?
But I want to be careful here because
but jobs will get replaced. So what happens then to poverty? And
that's the question is what do we do when all these jobs go? And like you said, it's going to be the intellects, the doctors, the consultants, the lawyers. Like,
we all have to learn how to paint and draw.
What are we going to be doing? And how are we going to make money and pay for things? Like, people talk about UBI, but it's like, are we capable of doing something like that? I mean, I really question it.
No, Chrissy, I'm with you. I don't think humans are wired for abundance. I think we are wired for subsistence and competition and scarcity. So I think it's really fascinating because about a year ago, there was this Silicon Valley sort of like cocktail party conversation around P doom, as you may remember, P parenthetical doom, which is what is your percentage that you think AI is going to kill humanity? What's your doom percentage? And Elon's like, I'm a 20 P doom score. And I'm probably around that too. I mean, technology is intrinsically neutral. I mean, with the invention of the ship came the invention of the shipwreck. Like, it is what it is. It just so happens that this one is the most powerful technology in my view, and therefore its potential for catastrophe is high, but it's also its potential for democratizing healthcare and democratizing education and creating this sort of post-scarcity society. I mean, to me, I think once this hits maturity and gets diffusion, you're going to see massive augmentation to total factor productivity. And therefore, you're going to see GDP rise. I mean, there's some estimates that are forecasting at maturity, we're going to see 30% annual total factor productivity improvements. And by the way, economists have no framework to measure this. I mean, because it really is unprecedented. And I do think, you know, Silicon Valley gets into a lot of trouble with those four infamous words. I mean, this time is different. But I do believe that there is something categorically different about this. And so, Ash, to answer your question, I am a deep optimist. And I actually think this is existentially important because if we think about some of these real insoluble societal problems like climate change and the fact that there was the Maha report released yesterday, and fact is we spend 18% of our US GDP on healthcare, and we've got declining longevity in this country. And so I do think we're going to need the assistance of this sort of omniscient and soon to be recursively self-improving technology to help us in these really complex high dimensional spaces like biology. And Dario, I have a lot of respect for, talks about this being the compressed 21st century, where we're going to have a century of scientific and biomedical discoveries compressed into 5 to 10 years, which sounds super, super hyperbolic, but I believe it is possible because if you're thinking about automating certain roles, I mean, think about it as just a great acceleration. Like Dario talks about, like, if you look over the past generation, the things that have really marked are discontinuous breakthroughs in medicine and science. I mean, just over the last generation of mapping the human genome or X-ray crystallography or immunotherapy or CAR T or CRISPR, right? It just so happens these things emerge kind of metronomically every like 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years. But many of them we've known about for generations. We've known about CRISPR for generations. We knew about mRNA since the 1960s. If you had this sort of super intelligence that is a virtual biologist or a virtual scientist to help accelerate this, and I do believe we're going to enter this period of like discontinuous discovery. And the areas that I'm most excited about this, Christy and Ash, are around science and medicine. But we have to be prepared that there may be greatly diffused societal goods, but the harms are going to be very specific. And right now, the top of our hierarchy in earnings and respect are the professionals that are super like credentialed and hierarchical and highly compensated, and you take years of education to get there, and there's still huge variability in performance because we're humans. I think we're going to have this reckoning where human judgment is not at the top of the pyramid. And it'll be an input, and we're going to have to infuse these AI systems, especially as we move toward agentification, with human values. And I don't want to be super glib about this because here's where my P-doom gets a little higher. Like, if we don't understand these creatures, I mean, again, speciation, like, how do we control them? And if you look over the history of all evolutionary and biological, like, history, there's not a single example of a less intelligent creature controlling a more intelligent creature.
Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, I think this moment, to your point, is very, very different, right? I think if we don't take the moment right now to steer it with care and caution and understand how to shape it, I think AI is actually going to shape us far more than we are going to shape it. I think I am concerned about that. And I'm sure there are very smart people working on this, but this is something I think about all the time.
I think you're right, Ash. And as a clinician and as technologist, I think you can speak with some throw weight on that. I'll take it further. And this is where Chrissy and I have had so many fun conversations because I've learned she's really challenged some of my assumptions in this, but I've sort of come out the other side thinking this is the most important moment in history. And with every turn of the crank in the algorithmic sophistication, the advances in the hardware as they go from H100s to now GB200s and soon Rubin, I mean, these non-linear improvements in hardware, software, and in capabilities. With every turn of the crank, as we go from memory to tool control to agentification, we lose some of our co-creative power. We lose some of our self-determination, jurisdiction, co-creation. And eventually, when these things hit escape velocity, and I don't mean to sound like Terminator and Skynet, but I do think there is a moment of escape velocity. And I believe that is when you can automate AI research. And Demis Hassabis, who won the Nobel Prize for chemistry on December 10th for his work in AlphaFold and now that's been spun off into isomorphic labs, he talks about 3 levels of intelligence. The first level of intelligence is interpolation. You look at 1 million images of cats, you can make some modifications to it. It's still a cat, but it's different. And that's interpolation. And then he says the second level is extrapolation. And this was that famous, 2016 AlphaGo competition against the 18-time defending world champion in Go, and this famous move 37, where the machines showed creativity, where it extrapolated, it created a new move that defied 4,000 years of convention in the game of Go. And people thought the game of Go would never be solved. They thought it was an insoluble game because the number of potential configurations on the 19 by 19 board are 10 to the 170th, which is more atoms than there are in the known universe. And yet, here was an example of a machine understanding this. That's extrapolation. And then the third Demis says is invention. We are not at the level of invention. These machines cannot hypothesize. They cannot theorize a new algorithm or a new molecule, although just in the past couple weeks, there have been some claims. DeepMind just came out with Alpha Evolve, which they're saying can hypothesize and improve. But once you automate AI research, you are going to get escape velocity. And then you can replicate as many AI researchers at the cost of compute. And so think about it as capital going into compute, going into infinitely replicated researchers. And instead of the big misconception about agents is it's not just a substitution for human labor with equivalency at 1/30th the cost, at like 70% of the fidelity of the output. Think about this as like a hive mind, right? You can have individuated agents, individuated AI researchers who can go do this R&D hypothesis and track that productization and that customer service interaction, but they instantly repatriate all of those learnings to the hive mind, right? So whoever figures out how to automate AI research first wins. And that's why this has such huge geopolitical implications between China and the United States. And so I don't know if you guys want to talk about that, but like, I just think about this moment as deeply, deeply underappreciated by, we three have sort of drunk the Kool-Aid, and I'm spending an increasing amount of my time in San Francisco these days. And so maybe I'm too indoctrinated, but it's hard to unsee some of these things that at least I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Ash and myself spend a lot of time, and Ash is a technologist for sure. But I also see, like, I was literally on Facebook today and I saw an ad, and it was Philips, and they had a chief medical officer at Philips. He's actually a lovely guy, somebody I know personally, who they quoted him saying it's going to augment. And that term augment is what I hear most of the time, at least in marketing, when kind of describing this technology as applied to clinicians. And I think what you are saying is taking it a step further, because you are saying, or at least maybe I'm reading between the lines, like, this is going to disrupt the hierarchy. It's going to disrupt kind of the idea of a human with a lot of intelligence and years of experience kind of being almost godlike, which is a lot of physicians these days. And hearing you talk, it almost made me think it could even be the physicians disrupted first, because the jobs that feel the most sacred in the world that you were describing are maybe the ones where it's that individual who's very hands-on with a senior in their home, like helping them get in and out of a bathtub. To me, like, I don't know how an AI does, maybe you could say it's going to be someday a robot or something, but to me, it's like the ones that have that compassion, the bedside manner, that are physically doing the work of helping a person or a patient who is sick and vulnerable. I don't know how that, maybe walk me through how that gets replaced, but the one who's sort of sitting there and making diagnostic decisions based on medical school, maybe that is something that you get where I'm going. It's kind of the opposite of what you usually see.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I do think that human to human touch, I mean, I do believe that we're going to see embodied AI faster than people are prepared for. And we're going to see bipedal humanoid robotics. Like, I think we're going to see a lot more bipedal humanoid robots than humans within the next couple decades. But there's this fascinating thing called Moravec's paradox. Hans Moravec was this famous roboticist, and he said, the hard stuff is easy and the easy stuff is hard. We mastered chess in 1997. Algorithms mastered Go in 2016. We still haven't mastered the dexterity of the hand and the sensory motor skills. Like, it took billions of years for evolution to evolve sensory motor skills. But we've only had sort of the neocortex for like a couple 100 million years. Like, human cognition is very recent. And it turns out mimicking the hard stuff, like high order human cognition, is a lot easier than mimicking the easy stuff, which is picking up my cell phone here. And so ironically, I think the high cognition jobs like medicine and finance and consulting and law are going to be disintermediated sooner than the jobs that require human presence and physicality. And again, I don't want to be super apocalyptic here and say like the highest compensated jobs in the economies are going to go first, but I do think that this technology is unprecedented and that it's coming for the intelligentsia. And it will be augmentative in the short term. I think you're going to see those who weaponize the tech or become most proficient with the tech are going to see augmented impact in their productivity and in their output and their creativity. But eventually, the direction of travel suggests that the AI systems are going to exceed our ability to do high cognition work. And this is going to be complicated. I think the technology will permit things that regulatory capture and societal discomfort will prohibit. And this is where I think authoritarian countries are going to be much better at this than Western liberal democracies, right? Because you can only go as fast as the special interest groups will permit you. I mean, China just recently announced its first AI hospital, right? And it's got 26 medical specialties, and they did 10,000 synthetic patients, and the accuracy was higher than human diagnosticians. And they're doing a lot with Tsinghua University.
I just can't imagine that in the US. I mean, just think about how many groups would lobby against that. Like,
I mean, I don't know, Chrissy and Eric, I feel like it's not just the intelligentsia. I might have to disagree with you there. I think there is a lot going on in the physical AI space, like you talked about. The AI doesn't need a PhD to be useful. It just needs patterns, right? So I think you're going to see more replacement of self-checkout and computer vision cashier stations. You're going to see delivery drivers being replaced, right? You're going to see more Waymos and Teslas and whatever on there. You're going to see janitorial staff. You're going to see staff in the warehouses that are autonomous. I mean, I can go on and on. Home aides, right, in the healthcare sector, farm workers. I mean, look at what's happening in defense. You are replacing human pilots with autonomous drones that are learning, they're targeting, there's recognition, there's action. And I mean, they're now in decision support, but ultimately it will be warfare that's autonomous. It's everybody. And I think we have to take control and train it and think about research and safety. And I think this is the moment.
I love that, Ash. And if the impacts are pretty distributed and pretty democratized, that's actually good for society. It'd be terrible if this was just localized to a couple professions, because then you'd have the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century Luddite revolution, right? But just to land the plane a little bit on something, Chrissy, you said, because Ash, I'm in complete agreement with you. There is a real deep irony here that I used to think that one of the last sort of refuges for humanity was in our empathy and our compassion. And it turns out we're learning empathy from the chatbots. And there's a deep psychological truth that's super operative here and that has really big ramifications for healthcare. And that is that humans lie to other humans to avoid embarrassment and stigmatization and judgment, but they will tell the truth to a chatbot. And chatbots are actually pretty damn good conversationalists. I mean, right now with the advanced voice capabilities, you've got it's super Turing test passing, right? They have intonation, they have inflection, they can mimic size and inhalation, exhalation. They have 230 millisecond latency, so you can speak at the speed of human conversation. You can interrupt, you can change your volume. But more importantly, they're evincing theory of mind capabilities so they can discern the unvoiced emotion. With computer vision, you can see micro expressions. They're infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate. They're sycophantic in the best way and the worst way, meaning they match to Eric Larsen's personality, not somebody like Eric Larsen, God forbid. Like they have memory, so now they can build like a recollection of your likes and dislikes. And think about the implications for behavioral care in this country, where we have a total scarcity of psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, coaches. We have a geographic maldistribution. Something like 75% of American counties don't have a child psychiatrist, right? And you've got an epidemic of loneliness. You've got 1 out of every 3 people in industrialized country who's lonely. And we know and Ash as a doctor has forgotten more about this than I'll ever know, but we know when you've got a medical complaint with a behavioral comorbidity, your medical costs are between 2.5 and 6.7x greater. So think about a chatbot that can know you, mitigate loneliness. You are more open to talking to it. You can talk to it at 11 p.m. on Sunday when you get the Sunday scaries. We lose $500 billion annually because of non-adherence to a pharmacologic regimen. But if I have a constant reminder that is psychologically like super astute and very persuasive, so turns out that chatbots are more empathetic than busy doctors that have like huge panel sizes and are fighting with payers and the rest of it. So going back to the original question of like optimism versus pessimism, I'm super, super optimistic. And I just think this is like going to have to take a really deep societal and humanistic like conversation about how do we get ready. I do believe it's going to become a social redistribution question because we are going to have superabundance. I do believe that this technology is going to be massively deflationary, which is kind of ironic when we think about the hyperscalers alone spending 341 billion in capex this year, right? And Sam is just announcing the extension of Stargate into the UAE. And in Abilene, Texas, they're building the first Stargate site. It's going to be about $12 billion to build with a gigawatt of energy, right? That would serve thousands of homes for a year. So we've got this huge industrial mobilization. And to Ash's point, we better accelerate some of these conversations because the paper that I recently wrote was called The Gen AI Juggernaut, US Healthcare is Not Prepared, and it's a little bit of a confrontational title. But I do think we are not prepared. I don't think we're prepared in US healthcare, and I don't think we're prepared in US society.
All right, I'm going to throw you out a really hot question because we've been talking about massive shifts. We've been talking about dislocation. We've been talking about job losses on a massive scale, deflationary economics. I mean, all of this hopefully leading to a period of abundance. Who the heck knows? If you have friends considering having kids or having more kids, and they say to you, Eric, given all this, is it a good thing to bring more human beings into the world? Like, what kind of world are we bringing them into? What do you say?
I say absolutely. I mean, like you have kids, Ashley's kid, I have kids. I've been having this conversation with my kids right now because I got a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 16-year-old. Like, all right, Dad, smarty pants, what am I supposed to study? Right? And going back to Vinod has fabulous advice here. I mean, he said a generation ago, the worst advice you could have given your kids is like follow your passion, right? Because that's about as non-economic as it comes. And he said, right now, the recommendation he gives, and I've really adopted this, is learn for agility. I think about this as the revenge of the humanities plus STEM. If you think about this as like an alien intelligence that's like, I'm in Washington, D.C. today, the spaceship is hovering above, and we don't know if it's like friend or foe, and you got a couple years before it really manifests. Like, how would you spend your time? So I'm telling my kids, like, just study for the broadest comprehension. Study philosophy, theology, history, art, science, music.
This is what I did. I was like, I studied art history, for God's sakes. Like, that was what I did in my undergraduate. And I cannot tell you how many people said it was a waste of time. And now the history, the philosophy, the art, all these things are somehow have made sense throughout my life, that like it's just added so much incredible value, and it gives you this sense of just like humanity through centuries. And I don't know, I can't think of anything better than that in terms of something to study. Like, go to Europe, I don't know, like go to some museums.
Or Mars. We need more kids so that we can go populate Mars.
That's right. That's right. Well, Chrissy, look, I mean, it's one of the reasons that you and I are such good friends, because like I got to tell you, like I feel the same way, and I'm demanding my kids they each did a gap year to study abroad and like just wander and figure out what the heck they should be thinking about. But like I do think if you can enter the workforce now and be unencumbered with like $250,000 in medical school debt, then it is the most exciting time to be entering the workforce, because you can reconceptualize each industry from an AI and agentic first set of principles. So my son, my 20-year-old, is doing an internship in Silicon Valley right now, just doing immersion into a healthcare AI company. And it's so cool, like, because we're living in San Francisco part-time, and at the end of the day, I'll come home and I'll be like, okay, kid, what'd you do today? And he'll tell me. And he's like, he's using deep research, and he's using Claude, and he's using Gemini, and he's producing these like world-class reports, right? And I'm like, before you share those with your team, if you don't take the time to study them and internalize all of them, like you are just a glorified like secretary research person, right? The cognitive offloading that we're going to see is very, very dangerous. People will surrender their critical thinking skills and just subordinate it to the AI. It's this notion of automaticity, where you just sort of like, when you automate something and then you just sort of like defer excessively to the machine. And so I do think it is a tremendously exciting time to enter the workforce, but you have to orient toward the AI as almost cybernetics. Like, how do we become cybernetic, like both man, woman plus machine? Like, it sounds a little dramatic and science fiction-y. And by the way, I personally think BCI, brain computer interface, is going to be where we as a species need to evolve so that we can co-evolve with this synthetic intelligence. I mean, it's like first coexistence and then co-evolution. There's a great book that Craig Mundy and Dr. Kissinger, recently departed, and Eric Schmidt wrote called Genesis, that articulates this notion of co-evolution. And so what I'm telling my kids is study for the humanities and STEM, study for agility, study for curiosity, but use the AI, become super proficient with the AIs. And it's the revenge of the generalist, right? If domain expertise goes toward free, then it's the generalist that is very facile with the AI, that is co-evolving with the AI, that's going to be able to win. And it really does become an enlightened social redistribution policy that is going to be incumbent on us. If goods asymptote toward free, goods and services, it's going to be massively deflationary, but there's going to be a lot of dislocation. I mean, there's this great article that John Maynard Keynes wrote a century ago, kind of crazy enough. It's called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And in it, he wrote it in 1930, said within a century, we're not going to need to work. because he was looking at all the mechanization happening in industrial Great Britain. And he's like, look, a century out, we're not going to need to work. And by the way, 2030 is looking like a damn prescient prediction. But he's like, got very worried because he's like, humans are not built for abundance. And so he prescribed 15 hours of work per week for the spiritual nourishment. Because he looked at the lazy British aristocracy and he said, fuck, like that's what we're going to be as humanity.
I don't know. I watched Downton Abbey and that doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, if you're living upstairs, it's not bad. Downstairs may not be as good.
Top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, right.
Look, I think you're so right. I do worry that the school's education system isn't catching up as well. So I hope they do. Because like you, Eric, I also tell my kids, I'm like, AI needs to be a part of your mental operating system. You need to be so proficient that you need to be able to learn how to ask better questions, right? Because you don't want to be the automaton of whatever the chat GPT is coming out with. You need to understand what the AI can and can't do. We're not in a static world. We're like in this dynamic world that's constantly changing faster than it's ever changed before. And so unless you and the AI are one, to your point, and understand when it's being manipulative, when it's being biased, when it's wrong, right? And how you're going to coach and train it to be better to help you, you're probably not going to win as fast as others that understand it.
Look, Ash, I think you're 1,000,000% right. Sam Altman tweeted recently, it was after O3 came out. And he's like, if you're not max skilling, I think he said, for 3 hours a day with O3, NGMI, not going to make it. And with his characteristic lowercase. And I thought about that a lot. And I was like, I think he may be right. Because there is this sort of cybernetic notion where, we talked about this a little earlier. Like, Chrissy, you asked about the augmentative side. And I gotta tell you, I think our professions are telling fairy tales to each other. You have some very prominent people that we know and respect saying AI is not going to replace doctors, but doctors who use AI are going to replace those who don't. Like, that's a bedtime story. It is not true. I do not believe that. I think that you are going to see massive dislocation. Now, you're going to see a lot of new work created because, there's a great company, Sierra, that Brett Taylor and his colleague Clay founded, and it's really automating or agentifying the customer interface. And if you can create a conversational AI as a customer interface, then you can theoretically not just supplant the $110 billion global industry on call centers, but you can call your customers and have an hour-long conversation with them and do it for as long as you can. I mean, agents go to the cost of compute. And as the cost of compute goes down and as the proficiency of the agents goes up, you can do 1,000 things that you couldn't do before. So I'm not one of those lump of labor economists that think that there's a fixed lump of labor. And if you automate parts of it, then that dislocates jobs. I don't believe that. I think it's going to create a lot of possibilities. But on balance, if you create intelligence and you automate intelligence and then you agentify that into not just thinking but doing, I think it's going to disrupt a lot of the rigid professions that are governed. I mean, think about medicine. Like, medicine is still predicated on the 1910 Flexner report. We still select for quantitative and memorization skills when we admit people to medical school. And to Ash, to your excellent point, the education system is brittle. It is not capturing this. But the studies where there was just a study in Nigeria where kids that were not proficient with the computers got access for the first time to ChatGPT. And they did the cognitive improvement in 2 months of the equivalent of like 2 years. And you're starting to see isolated but increasingly frequent examples of this. I mean, to me, the two industries that have seen negative productivity over the past generation, education and healthcare, are the ones that have the greatest surface area exposure to disruption from this. And so I think we just got to get ready. And yeah.
So it sounds like, to wrap us up, because we could talk for hours, we should all just get used to having some more free time and hope that we make some big changes too to ensure that there is quality of life for all of us, that is my fear when it comes to this stuff, that like, it's just, what do you do with all, I think there's a great point about like, how do humans operate in this era of abundance, but I hope we can even get to that abundance. It's going to be an interesting few years, to say the least. And I am excited for having this kind of front seat here at Second Opinion to talk to people like Eric, talk to people all over the industry and hear what they think about this huge technological transformation that's upon us. So I want to say thank you to Eric. This was a phenomenal discussion. If you're listening to the pod, we'd love to hear from you as well and hear what you think. I'm sure you have, maybe you profoundly agree, maybe you profoundly disagree. Let us know. And Zenooz, my co-host, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome. That was super fun.
Super fun.
Thanks for tuning in to Second Opinion. Share it with colleagues and friends and message us to let us know what topics you want to discuss on the podcast. If you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and make sure you are subscribed. And check out Christina's Second Opinion newsletter on Beehive. A link to subscribe is in the episode description. Second Opinion is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Turpentine DC, Age of Miracles, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.